No, no, this cannot be real. Those were the first words that fell out of my husband's mouth when he stood paralyzed on our front porch holding a suitcase in one hand and his girlfriend standing beside him. The bottle of Prosecco slid from Danielle's fingers and exploded across the flagstone walkway. For a moment nobody moved. Not Gregory, not Danielle, not the neighbors clustered across the street pretending they were not watching, and certainly not me. I stood in the doorway of the house where I had spent the last 30 years of my life, pressing a manila folder against my chest. Then I smiled. A genuine smile, the kind I had not worn in a very long while. But to understand why Gregory Whitfield looked like he had just seen an apparition that Saturday evening, you have to travel back exactly 1 week. Back to a Tuesday night. Back to dinner. Back to the moment my marriage collapsed. My name is Diane Whitfield. I am 57 years old, and until last spring I believed I lived a wonderfully predictable life. I lived in Greenville, South Carolina. I drank my coffee on the back deck every single morning. I waved at the same neighbors. I bought my groceries at the same Publix on the corner. And for 30 years I was married to the same man. Or at least I thought I knew the man I had married. That Tuesday began like any other. I spent the morning answering emails for our bookkeeping firm. Gregory had launched the company years earlier, but I had been managing the ledgers, client scheduling, payroll, and tax preparation support for almost 2 decades. People always called it Gregory's business. I never bothered correcting them. I did not care about credit. I cared about keeping everything running smoothly. Around 5 in the afternoon I began making dinner. Pot roast, roasted potatoes, buttered carrots. Nothing elaborate. Just the sort of meal we had eaten hundreds of times before. Gregory came home around 6:30. He barely glanced in my direction. At first I assumed he had endured a difficult day. Tax season had always made him irritable. But something felt distinctly different. He seemed strangely composed, almost as though he had rehearsed. We sat down at the kitchen table at exactly 6:45. I remember the time because the local news was playing quietly from the television in the family room. A weather segment, traffic updates, ordinary life continuing. Then Gregory cleared his throat. There is something we need to discuss. I set down my fork. All right. He folded his hands together. No hesitation, no guilt, no visible discomfort, just a man delivering information. Danielle is moving in next month. I blinked. I am sorry? Danielle. He said it as though I should immediately know exactly who that was. I did not, at least not right away. Then I remembered. Danielle Croft, a woman who worked at an upscale interior design showroom downtown. I had met her once at a Chamber of Commerce mixer. Tall, auburn-haired, maybe 37, perhaps younger. I stared at him. The words took several seconds to rearrange themselves into something comprehensible. When they finally did, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. You are joking. I am not. The room suddenly felt considerably smaller. What do you mean she is moving in? Gregory looked down at his plate, then back up at me. We have been seeing each other. The sentence landed like a fist. How long? His answer came far too quickly. A little more than a year. A year. An entire year. 365 days of deception. I sat there staring at him while the kitchen clock ticked loudly behind us. Finally, I asked the question everyone asks. Why? He sighed. Not sorrowfully, more like someone explaining a decision he had already finalized. Danielle makes me happy. I wish I could tell you I hurled my water glass or screamed or stormed out of the room. But real life does not always operate that way. Sometimes you are simply too stunned to react. I just sat there, listening, watching, trying to comprehend how the man I had shared a bed with for 3 decades could sound so utterly detached. Gregory kept talking. Something about fresh starts. Something about rediscovering himself. Something about refusing to waste whatever years he had remaining. The phrases blurred together. Every cliché in existence suddenly took up residence in my kitchen. Then came the part that wounded me most, not because it was cruel but because it was practical. You are going to need to move out. I looked up slowly. Excuse me. By Friday. I honestly believed I had misheard him. Friday. That gives you 3 days. 3 days. 30 years of marriage. 3 days to vacate. I stared at the family photographs mounted on the wall behind him. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthday celebrations, an entire lifetime reduced to a deadline. Then Gregory added something that made my stomach twist. The house stays with me." His voice carried the confidence of a man who believed the matter was thoroughly settled. Concluded, finished. Danielle would move in. I would move out. End of discussion. The peculiar thing is that anger never arrived. Not immediately. Instead, I felt exhausted. Profoundly exhausted, as though someone had unplugged me from my own existence. And that is precisely when I smiled. Gregory looked puzzled. "What?" I shook my head. "Nothing. You are handling this better than I anticipated." That nearly made me laugh out loud. Better? I was sitting amid the wreckage of my marriage. But I remembered something my father used to say, something he repeated throughout my entire childhood. Never interrupt someone while they are busy making a mistake. So I simply nodded. "If that is what you want." The relief that flooded Gregory's face was instantaneous, and that told me everything. He had braced for a fight, a scene, resistance. Instead, he received agreement. And that made him careless. Extraordinarily careless. Later that night, after he had gone to bed, I sat alone in the attic hunting for old family photo albums. I was not even certain why. Perhaps I needed something familiar, something solid, something real. The attic smelled of cedar and accumulated dust. Boxes lined every wall. Most had not been opened in years. Around midnight, I discovered an old metal lockbox tucked behind a stack of Christmas decorations. I almost overlooked it entirely. Then I noticed my father's handwriting across the lid, and suddenly my pulse quickened. Because my father had been dead for 11 years. And whatever waited inside that box was about to change absolutely everything. I sat on the attic floorboards with that old metal lockbox positioned in front of me, listening to Gregory snoring through the ceiling below. It was a strange sound to hear at that particular moment. Normal. Ordinary. A husband sleeping peacefully in his own bed. Except my husband had just informed me that his girlfriend would be moving into my house and I had 3 days to disappear. The box was gunmetal gray, scuffed around the corners and considerably heavier than it appeared. My father had written Diane house papers on a strip of masking tape stretched across the top. I traced my thumb over his handwriting. My father, Walter Sandoval, had been an intensely practical man. He drove the same Chevrolet pickup for 18 years, saved every receipt in a shoebox, and firmly believed nothing important should ever be settled with a handshake alone. When Gregory and I purchased the house back in the early 90s, Daddy had helped us with the down payment. At least that was what I had always assumed. I remembered him sitting at our kitchen table with his reading glasses perched low on his nose, saying, "This is for both of you, but mostly it is to keep my girl protected." At the time I laughed and told him not to fret. I was 27 then. I was certain I understood marriage, money, and life itself. At 57, sitting in my attic at 12:30 in the morning, I was no longer laughing. The lockbox was not actually locked. That was very much like Daddy. He trusted the box to be concealed well enough, then probably misplaced the key anyway. Inside were folders, yellowed documents, and an aging envelope from a law office in downtown Greenville. The attorney's name was familiar. Theodore Ashcroft. He had handled my parents' estate planning years ago. I opened the first folder. There were closing documents from when we bought the house. I skimmed them initially, not fully grasping what I was looking at. Then one phrase halted me completely. Sandoval Family Residential Trust. I read it again. And again. The house had not been titled directly to Gregory and me. It had been placed into a trust my father had established. My hands went cold. I kept reading, slower this time. There were pages describing the property, the address, the trustee, and the beneficiaries. My name appeared throughout. Gregory's did not. At first I assumed I was misreading something. Legal paperwork has a talent for making a person feel foolish. I had spent 20 years assisting with tax forms and payroll records, but trust language was an entirely different animal. So I gathered every document, pushed them back into the box, and carried everything downstairs as silently as I could manage. I did not sleep at all. By 6 in the morning I was seated at the kitchen table with black coffee and a yellow legal pad. Gregory wandered in around 7 wearing his bathrobe, looking mildly annoyed that I was already awake. "Packing?" he asked. I looked up. "Starting today." He nodded like a landlord inspecting a rental unit. "I think that is best." I wanted to fling the coffee at his face. I did not. "What are your plans this weekend?" I asked, keeping my voice deliberately level. His expression shifted slightly. "Why?" I need to know when you will be here. I am taking Danielle to Savannah. We will be back next Saturday. Of course he was. A weekend excursion while I packed my life into cardboard boxes. That gives you plenty of time, he added. I smiled into my coffee cup. It certainly does. After he departed for the office, I dialed the number printed on the old law office envelope. It had been disconnected. That did not surprise me. Theodore Ashcroft would have been in his 80s by now, assuming he was still living. I searched online, telephoned 2 law offices, and finally learned his practice had shuttered 8 years earlier. The receptionist at the last office told me some of his older files were transferred over to Callahan and Reyes on Augusta Street. By 10:30 I was standing in their lobby with the lockbox clutched against my chest. A young receptionist asked whether I had an appointment. I said, no, but I may have a husband problem and a house problem, and I would deeply appreciate someone telling me which one is worse. She stared at me for exactly 1 second, then vanished into the back. 15 minutes later, an attorney named Vanessa Reyes invited me into her office. Vanessa was probably in her early 50s. With silver threading through her dark hair and the unflappable expression of someone who had heard every story twice over. She examined the documents for nearly 40 minutes. I watched her face intently. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Whitfield, I do not want to give you a definitive answer until I verify the county records and confirm the trust status. But based on what I am seeing here, your husband may not have the authority to force you out. I gripped the arms of my chair. Does he own the house? Not in the manner he apparently believes he does. That sentence nearly made me lightheaded. Vanessa explained that my father had structured the entire purchase in a way specifically designed to shield the property. The trust had originally permitted Gregory and me to reside there as a married couple, but the beneficial interest appeared to remain solely with me. Your father was cautious, she said. He was stubborn, I replied. Vanessa smiled. Sometimes those two are cousins. So it was not straightforward. Some updated filings were missing. There had been a transfer amendment executed years earlier and she needed the original document. County records would help but not sufficiently. We needed proof the trust had never been formally dissolved. So what do I do in the meantime? I asked. Do not move out permanently. Do not sign anything. Do not send angry text messages. And do not tell him a single word about what we discussed. That last instruction proved harder than it sounds, because when I arrived home Gregory was standing in the living room with a tape measure, calculating wall dimensions for Danielle's furniture. I stood in the doorway watching him stretch the tape across the exact space where our wedding portrait had hung for 19 years. What are you doing? I asked. Danielle has a sectional, he said. Larger than ours. Our sofa is 9 years old. Exactly. I almost admired the sheer audacity. Almost. That afternoon my neighbor Ruth Kaminsky came over carrying zucchini bread wrapped in aluminum foil. Ruth was 72, widowed, sharp as a razor, and had known me since Gregory and I first moved in. She found me in the garage surrounded by half-packed boxes. Please do not tell me you are actually leaving, she said. I hesitated, then told her enough. Not everything. Just enough. Ruth listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she set the zucchini bread down on top of a box marked Christmas. Then she said, well, that man always did look like he ironed his personality flat. I laughed so abruptly I had to sit down on an overturned crate. It was the first genuine laugh I had managed in days. Ruth leaned closer. What do you need? Honestly, I need someone to reassure me I am not losing my mind. Oh, sweetheart, she said, patting my arm. Crazy people do not organize their boxes by room. Over the following 2 days, Ruth appointed herself my unofficial lookout, cheerleader, and snack supplier. She brought soup, neighborhood gossip, and once a screwdriver I never requested but apparently might need if matters got interesting. Meanwhile, Danielle began posting photographs online. Ruth showed me on her phone. Danielle at a furniture warehouse. Danielle holding paint swatches. Danielle captioning one photo, "New beginnings deserve beautiful spaces." I stared at the screen. My throat constricted. It was not simply betrayal. It was being erased while I was still standing right there. By Friday morning, Gregory left for Savannah with Danielle. He offered one final instruction before walking out the door. Please be gone before we return. I nodded, but I was not going anywhere. I was busy. Vanessa called at 3:15 that afternoon. "We located the county reference," she said. "Now we need the original trust amendment. Do you have any idea where your father stored older personal documents?" I surveyed the garage. Boxes stacked everywhere. Dust. Packing tape. 30 years of accumulated living piled up like evidence at a trial. "I will find it," I said. I searched until my knees ached. Near midnight, I pried open a dented filing cabinet that had belonged to my father. Behind expired insurance policies and a Whirlpool appliance warranty from 1997, I discovered a blue folder. Inside was the amendment. Signed, notarized, entirely valid. And tucked directly behind it was something else. A commercial loan document I had never laid eyes on before. Gregory had pledged company assets as collateral without ever informing me. I sank down onto the cold concrete floor of the garage and read until my eyes burned. The house was not the only thing Gregory had misunderstood, and by the time he returned home with Danielle, he was going to discover that the hard way. I did not realize how much stress I had been shouldering until someone finally confirmed I was not imagining things. That someone was Vanessa Reyes. Monday morning, 3 days after Gregory departed for Savannah with Danielle, I sat across from her in a conference room overlooking downtown Greenville. The Blue Ridge foothills were visible through the windows. Normally I adored that view. That particular morning I hardly registered it. Vanessa had spread documents across the table in tidy stacks. The trust papers, the amendment I had unearthed, county records, business documents, and the loan agreement that had kept me awake most of the night. She tapped the trust paperwork first. "The house issue is actually the simplest part." I blinked. "Simplest?" "Yes." Vanessa offered a small smile. "The trust is active. The amendment is valid. The county records match perfectly." I stared at her. For the first time in a week I felt my shoulders release. "So he cannot evict me?" "No." The word landed like a deep breath after being submerged underwater. Vanessa continued, "Legally speaking, Gregory's position is considerably weaker than he realizes." I leaned back in my chair. The odd thing was that I did not feel victorious. Not yet. Mostly I felt sorrowful. 30 years. 30 years together. And now I was sitting inside a law office learning that my husband did not actually comprehend the ownership of the home we had inhabited for decades. Or perhaps he understood perfectly and simply assumed I would never question him. Honestly, I was not certain which possibility wounded me more. Vanessa slid another document forward. "Unfortunately, the house is not the biggest issue." I looked down. The business loan agreement. My stomach tightened again. "Tell me." She folded her hands. "Gregory pledged company assets as collateral." "I know. What concerns me is how he did it." I frowned. Vanessa pointed towards several signatures. "Your bookkeeping business is structured as a partnership." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means he may not have possessed the authority to do certain things without your knowledge." I sat completely motionless. For years I had referred to the company as Gregory's business. Everyone did. Clients, friends, neighbors, even me. But according to the paperwork, that was not entirely accurate. Years earlier, when the business expanded, my name had been added as a legal partner. I remembered signing documents at the time. I simply never paid much attention. I trusted my husband. Vanessa kept talking. "The precise legal implications will take some time to determine." "How much time?" "Several weeks." I rubbed my forehead. Every answer seemed to generate 3 additional questions. The truth was proving expensive and exhausting. By the time I left Vanessa's office, my head throbbed. The next several days were not easy. Movies make revenge appear thrilling. Real life is mostly paperwork, phone calls, waiting and worrying. I spent hours assembling records, tax returns, bank statements, business reports, insurance documents. At night, I lay awake wondering whether I was doing the right thing. Somewhere around 3 one morning, I found myself sitting on the back porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The neighborhood was completely silent. A few porch lights glowed faintly in the distance. I thought about my marriage, about the first apartment Gregory and I rented, about the road trips we had taken, about all the ordinary moments that had once felt permanent. Part of me wanted to simply walk away. Forget the house. Forget the business. Forget the fight entirely. Start fresh somewhere new. The idea felt genuinely tempting. Then I remembered something. Not something dramatic. Something small. 4 years earlier I had worked 70-hour weeks helping rescue the company during a brutal tax season. I remembered skipping family gatherings, canceling plans, taking client calls during dinner, keeping everything afloat single-handedly. And now Gregory was attempting to erase all of that. This was no longer about revenge. It was about self-respect. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected development. My phone rang. Diane. The voice sounded familiar. Yes. This is Raymond Tucker. I smiled immediately. Raymond had owned a landscaping company and had been one of our accounting clients for nearly 20 years. We had guided him through audits, payroll complications, and tax disputes. Raymond, how are you? There was a pause. Then he said, Ruth told me what happened. Of course she had. In retrospect, expecting Ruth to keep a secret was wildly optimistic. I see. Listen, Raymond said, you kept my business alive back in 2011. Do not forget that. I was not entirely sure where he was headed. Then he added, if you need references, records, or somebody to remind people who actually ran that office, you call me. I sat quietly. Unexpected tears filled my eyes. Thank you. Over the following week, similar conversations occurred again and again. Former clients called. Friends checked in on me. A retired bank examiner named Douglas Ferrara even volunteered to review some of the business records. It turned out my father was not the only person who had spent years quietly observing. People noticed far more than I ever realized. Meanwhile, Gregory seemed completely oblivious to the storm assembling around him. Actually, oblivious is not the right word. Overconfident is more accurate. Ruth provided regular bulletins. Guess who ordered custom patio furniture? I sighed. Gregory and Danielle. The next day, guess who scheduled a housewarming party? Please do not tell me. Gregory. Apparently he intended to host a celebration the weekend following their return from Savannah. Neighbors, business contacts, friends, everyone was invited. The invitation described it as a new chapter gathering. Ruth nearly choked from laughing when she read it aloud. I wish I had found it funny. Mostly I found it insulting. A marriage ended. A life got dismantled. And somehow it became a themed party. Thursday morning Vanessa called. Her voice sounded different. Energized. Diane. What happened? We received final confirmation. I sat upright. The trust. Yes. I held my breath. The trust remains fully enforceable. For several seconds I could not speak at all. Vanessa continued, and there is more. My stomach tightened. The business documents support our concerns. I closed my eyes. So what happens now? There was a brief pause. Then Vanessa said something unexpected. We wait. I frowned. Wait. Gregory is about to make a very public mistake. I was not entirely sure I liked where this was heading. Vanessa sensed my hesitation. You do not have to humiliate him. Good. But the truth needs to come out. That part one understood completely. The following afternoon Vanessa and I met again. She outlined a plan. A legal plan. Careful, documented, entirely above board. No tricks, no schemes, just facts. Yet the more she explained it, the more anxious I became. Because this was not going to unfold in a courtroom. It was going to unfold at the house. The house Gregory believed belonged to him. The house he intended to share with Danielle. The house where he planned to host his celebration. And according to Vanessa, we were going to allow him to walk directly into the consequences. I stared at the papers spread in front of me. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that after years of making decisions jointly, I was finally making one entirely on my own. Vanessa looked at me. You can still back out. I considered that. Then I thought about Tuesday night. About being ordered out by Friday. About Danielle selecting paint colors for my living room. About 30 years being discarded like an inconvenience. Finally I nodded. No. Vanessa smiled. Good. I drew a deep breath. Outside, the foothills stood quiet beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, I signed the authorization forms. And for the first time since Gregory's announcement, I was not reacting to his choices. I was preparing for my own. Saturday arrived warm and luminous. The kind of South Carolina spring day that persuades people to open their windows and linger outdoors. Dog walkers crowded the sidewalks. Neighbors knelt in flower beds. The sky was an impossible shade of blue. And by 10 that morning I was standing in my own kitchen watching a locksmith replace every lock in the house. Even then, part of me could not believe this was genuinely happening. Not because it was unlawful. Quite the opposite. Everything had been reviewed, documented, and approved. Vanessa had been meticulous to the point of obsession. The trust controlled the property. I was the beneficiary. Gregory possessed no legal authority to remove me. For years he had operated purely on assumptions. Now he was about to collide with reality. The locksmith finished around noon. He handed me a small ring of shiny new keys. All set. I thanked him, then stood quietly in the living room after he departed. Sunlight poured across the hardwood floors. The same floors Gregory and I had installed together 14 years earlier. The same room where we had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, life itself. I had expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt weary. Ruth arrived shortly afterward carrying a tray of deviled eggs. "Emergency provisions," she announced. I laughed. "Ruth, this is not a football game." He peered out the front window. "Give it time." By mid-afternoon, Vanessa arrived. Then a process server. Then a representative from the Trust Administration Office. Everything proceeded calmly. Professionally. No theatrics. Just paperwork. Legal notices. Official documentation. The front door received a sealed packet explaining the property status and immediate restrictions. A second packet addressed the business concerns. Every piece had been prepared with tremendous care. Every signature verified. Every detail double-checked. No surprises. At least not for us. Around 4:30, neighbors began noticing the activity. Not because we invited anyone, but because neighbors always notice activity, especially in Greenville, especially on quiet residential streets. By 5, Ruth had already spoken with half the neighborhood. I suspect she regarded that as community service. At 6:15 she strolled back into the kitchen carrying iced tea. "Word is spreading." I shook my head. "You are enjoying this far too much." "Diane," she said, completely serious, "I have been retired for 12 years. This is the most thrilling thing that has happened on this street since Norman Pruitt reversed his RV into his own mailbox." "Fair point." Then we waited. Around 7 my phone buzzed. Vanessa glanced at the screen. "Gregory." I nodded and declined the call. A minute later he called again. Then again. Then a text message arrived. "Running late. Be ready to leave tonight." Ruth nearly toppled off her chair laughing when I read it aloud. I did not respond. I did not need to. At 7:45 I heard tires crunching across the driveway. The room fell completely silent. Even Ruth stopped talking. Through the front window I watched a black SUV pull in. Gregory stepped out first. Danielle followed. Both were dressed nicely. Weekend getaway attire. Relaxed. Confident. Danielle carried shopping bags. Gregory carried a bottle of Prosecco. Neither of them had the faintest inkling what awaited them. My pulse began racing. Not from fear but from anticipation. Because despite everything, this moment was finally real. No more planning. No more paperwork. No more waiting. Gregory strolled toward the porch smiling. Danielle threaded her arm through his. He unlocked his phone, presumably checking messages. Then they reached the front door and stopped. The new lock was immediately conspicuous. Gregory frowned. Danielle frowned too. He tried his key. Nothing. Nothing. The smile evaporated. Then he noticed the documents affixed beside the door. He stepped closer, pulled one free, began reading. I watched the precise moment confusion transformed into concern. Then concern transformed into panic. Danielle leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" No answer. He kept reading. The color drained entirely from his face. The Prosecco bottle slipped slightly in his grip. Danielle snatched the papers and read faster. Then came the moment I had envisioned in my mind 100 times. Gregory looked up at the house, at the windows, at the front porch, and finally at me standing calmly behind the glass. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then he whispered, "No." Danielle stared at him. "What?" "No." Louder this time. Then, "No. No. This cannot be real." The exact words from the beginning of this story. The Prosecco bottle dropped. Glass detonated across the flagstones. Neither of them even noticed. Gregory lunged toward the door and yanked the handle. Blocked. 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 Ruth leaned toward me. I believe he is testing whether reality has changed in the past 3 seconds. I almost choked trying to suppress a laugh. Outside, several neighbors had drifted closer. Purely by coincidence, naturally. Gregory pounded on the door. Diane. I opened it calmly. Not fully, just enough. Yes. His eyes were frantic. What is this? I glanced at the paperwork. Those are legal documents. Do not play games with me. I am not. Danielle stepped forward. You cannot lock him out of his own house. Vanessa materialized beside me. Actually materialized like every attorney in every film ever made. Impeccable timing. She can, Vanessa said. Gregory turned. The confidence he had worn all week vanished instantly. Vanessa handed him another folder. Everything is explained inside. His hand shook as he accepted it. Danielle grabbed pages and started reading. The further she read, the worse her expression became. Then she looked at Gregory. What do you mean you do not own the house? Silence. What do you mean? More silence. The neighbors edged fractionally closer. Gregory looked like he desperately wanted the earth to open and swallow him whole. Then Vanessa continued. And while we are discussing surprises, we should probably address the business records. That captured his attention instantly. His head snapped toward her. What business records? Vanessa simply pointed toward the second packet. The one detailing the loans, the undisclosed liabilities, the partnership issues, all the things he had assumed nobody would ever uncover. Danielle started reading again. Halfway through, she lowered the papers slowly. The look she gave Gregory was almost impressive in its intensity. Are you serious? Nobody answered. Danielle laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. Then she thrust the paperwork back at him. You told me something completely different. Danielle. No. She stepped backward. You said this house was yours. Let me explain. You said the business was yours. More neighbors appeared. At this point, hiding would have required a smoke grenade. Danielle looked around, then back at Gregory. Then she did something nobody anticipated. She climbed into the SUV alone and drove away, leaving him standing there, clutching legal documents, drenched in humiliation, surrounded by witnesses. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. As darkness settled over the foothills, Gregory remained frozen on the porch. The man who had ordered me out by Friday no longer had anywhere to go. And 3 days later he called requesting one final meeting. 3 days after the catastrophe on the front porch, Gregory called. I let it ring twice before answering. Not because I wanted to punish him. I simply needed a moment to steady myself. Hello. His voice sounded different immediately. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the certainty. Gone was the man who had sat across from me at dinner and casually announced that my replacement would be moving into the house. What remained sounded tired, aged, human. Diane. I waited. I would like to talk. The legal issues took several additional months to fully resolve. The business was divided fairly. The loans were addressed. The paperwork eventually concluded. Life moved forward slowly, the way authentic healing usually does. Today, nearly 3 years later, I am sitting on the same back porch where I once wept at 3 in the morning wondering whether my life was finished. It was not. If anything, it was starting over. The house remains in the family. The garden is thriving beautifully. Ruth still materializes without warning, carrying food nobody requested. And every so often I help women at the community center understand trusts, wills, finances, and the importance of paying attention to documents they once ignored. Myself very much included. If there is one lesson I carried away from all of this, it is that strength does not always look dramatic. Sometimes strength is simply refusing to surrender your dignity when someone else has forgotten your value. And sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is building a life so peaceful that bitterness no longer has room to live there. If this story meant something to you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment that forced you to rediscover your own strength? Feel free to share your experience. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, second chances, and real-life lessons, you are always welcome to come back for another one.